Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to double click somewhere off in space. And we want to create an audio input, right? All the purple stuff is mainly focused on video processing. The green tends to have more focus on audio processing, and we are going to start by doing audio file in. Notice there's also an audio device in, and that's for the microphone on your computer. So I'm going to say audio file in. As soon as I do that, you should see like chaos happening in here. And that's because there's already like an audio file. It's got like a house beat to it, I don't know. But there's already an audio file that loads in there, and we're seeing the right and left channel through this. So, right, so we've got our audio file in, but the first thing we probably want to do is be able to make sound happen. So if we double click again, we can go to audio device out and drop that somewhere, and then we just want to connect, right, the first operator to the second. And now we've got, right, now we're in a club. Yeah. It's getting, yeah. It's like my Saturday night. And so I'm going to go ahead and, so at this point, there's this arrow here that says bypass. If I click that, it's like a really easy way to just stop the audio from happening. Something to note is usually there's like the driver and the device in here. The driver is like your default audio driver for, it says direct sound or core audio. Direct sound is Windows, core audio is Mac. And then device default, that means whatever your system is set to. So if you had headphones plugged in, it would be going through your headphones. If your speakers are selected, it's going to come through your speakers. And we don't want it to do that right now because we're more interested in using the thing. Okay. And now I just want to make sure I do this all right. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is, in this case, we don't want to, like, we only want to deal with one audio channel. We don't want to have both of these channels split. We'd like to just combine it together and essentially make it mono. And there is a pretty simple way to do that with the math operator. So what we're going to do is something we haven't done yet, but if you hover over the output of an operator and you right click, it'll open up the same window. And now if I was to go to math, wherever that is, here it is, it actually connects a line to this. And you'll note in this case it actually connected all the way through, which isn't really what we wanted to do. We can just go ahead and pull this away from the pull the wire out of the audio device out, and then reconnect that straight from the audio source. Right, so I have my audio in going to the audio out, and then I also have it going to this math operator. So far, so good, everyone? Okay, so with the math operator selected, there's this combine channels option, and I just want to go down to average. And you'll notice that what that's done now is it's, right, instead of having a red and yellow pair, now I just have this one red thing. And you'll see it looks like totally crazy and insane at this point, which is fine. The next thing that we want to do is we want to make, like, this is so hard to look at, right? Like, it doesn't really give us any useful information except that something is happening. So we're going to use another operator called audio spectrum. And if I hover over this output and right click, I can go to, and maybe it's just spectrum, but I thought it was audio spectrum.
It's audio spectrum.
Yep, audio spectrum, there it is, awesome. So audio spectrum, and I drop it. And so now, instead of seeing things in a super nightmarish way, I can actually see a much nicer view. And I'm going to make this a little bigger and then zoom in a touch. And so what this is doing is, and it's kind of funny that it shows us like all the way up here, but these are all, this is the frequency bands from like 1 hertz or 1 cycle per second all the way up to 31,000 hertz, which humans can only really hear somewhere in here maybe if we're lucky. And then the lowest we can hear is about 20 hertz. A on middle A on the keyboard or whatever, A4, is it A4? A2? A4, I think it's A4, is 440 hertz. So really our hearing is like in here. And I don't know what's happening way up here, but something is. Okay. So yeah, so we've got these. So what would be nice is if rather than all the audio, if there was like maybe one area or one peak that we could really use, or when the audio spikes above a certain level, that we would like to be able to trigger something to happen, right? And so the next set of these objects is going to be doing that. Okay, so let me make sure I do this all correctly. Okay, cool. So the next thing we need to do is we need to analyze this audio signal, which analyze basically just makes it, turns it into something that we can use. So if you, sorry, I jumped ahead here. Because right now we can't really use this signal the way it is. We need it to be like, sort of like a slider. So if I right click on that and I go to analyze and drop this down, right? Now you'll see that I've got like something that looks familiar to maybe the LFO or something else, where I've got this thing like wiggling back and forth. And I just want to make sure I get all the settings mapped. Yep, and that one's just all by its lonesome. Okay. And sorry, I'm just making sure that, yeah, cool. All right. Okay, so I'm not really going to explain why we need the envelope. This is stuff where you, where these are parts that the idea is that they already exist, and it's the work you don't have to do to figure out how to make something happen. But so if we right click again and go to envelope, and drop this down, what we're basically going to do is, one of the ways, we're sort of creating, we're doing like division to make a number bigger, but it's doing division by using these different operators rather than like coding it out. So what we're going to do is, with the envelope selected, we're going to crank the envelope width parameter up to 10, which is the maximum. And you'll notice that like that kind of changes things a little bit over here, which is exactly what we want to have happen. Then we're going to, without touching anything else, like we're not doing the right click this time, we're just going to double click in space, create a math operator, and make sure we do this right. That's not what I wanted to do. Oh well. All right, so then we are going to go ahead and, oh boy. I need okay. Whew. All right. So then we are going to go ahead and we want the analyze signal. We want to drag that straight over to the math. And then we want to put the envelope in as well as the second thing we've added in there. And once we've done that, we need to go to these parameters and I think it's combine. We want to go to combine channels and divide, I think is the right one. No, wrong. Sorry, turn that off. We want to go to combine chops and go to divide. Okay, and what that's done is you'll notice, right, the signal is really small deviations over here, and we've basically created significantly larger deviations over here, right? This is essentially like amplified the signal enough to make it useful to use. Okay, I'm going to pull out of that a little bit and make sure I'm doing the next step right. Okay, so now there's a couple things we could do from here. And we're going to go with the trigger option. So what we need to do is we need to just come over here and we need to right click, or sorry, either right click on the output or double click and go find the trigger and drop a trigger in there. And you'll notice that like absolutely nothing is happening, right? This isn't exactly what we want. I want to make sure I get my settings correct. So let's see here. The trigger thresholds on, everything should be good there. Okay, so if we increase our trigger threshold just a tiny bit, you'll see that we get, right, some motion happening here. And I want to make sure I get that about where it's at here. Okay. And in my case, I set that trigger up significantly higher, right? It should be around what you're setting with this value is sort of like what percentage of that signal, like, right, when this starts is wiggling, when do I want that trigger to happen, right? And so, setting it at like, I think the last time I did it, I set it at like 85%, but let's go ahead and put it up at like 90 for now. That should work. You can already see, right, it's doing something positive there. It looks like something that we could actually look at. You can imagine like the difference between this math here and this trigger here, right? Imagine how spazzy looking at something on the screen like that would be versus something that's like much more even in its application over time. Okay. So then we are going to introduce a couple more objects. So first, we're going to pull this trigger. We're going to right-click on here. We're going to create a null. And the null should be somewhere in the middle. If I hit N, it'll at least be highlighted. There we go. Yay. And the null is just going to be, it just serves as a way to be like a common place where we can move things. And something that we haven't done yet is rename operators. So where this is called null1, we can just double click in that space and type in hub or whatever we wanted it to name it. This can help later if you've done something and you're like, I don't remember what this object's doing. This is just if we were to split this out and make additional changes, we could. We're going to keep this pretty simple and just do this one type of control. And let's make sure this math is right. Okay. Cool. So something to note, if of course the text stays the same size. Basically this is, right, not a huge signal. We'd like it to be able to go closer to maybe 0 to 1 or something useful. Although it honestly looks better than my last example, so maybe we don't have to do this, but we'll see what happens. So I just want to make sure that I get this part right. Yeah, there's nothing there. Okay. Okay. So we're going to create another math operator, which again, we could right click and we could and go to math and drop this down. And what we're doing with this one is we basically just want to be able to adjust the range. And it would really, and this is something that we can leave in its default state currently and not worry too much about. So I'm gonna leave it alone and we're gonna apply it to an object and then we're gonna see what happens and why we might want to make some adjustments. Okay, so we've got that. We're not gonna introduce the lag yet, but we do want to break that math out into a null again to make life easier. So I'm gonna right click, select null, drop it here, okay. So now what I need to do is say, okay, what's the object that I want to transform? And in our case, we're gonna just change the diameter of a circle. So if I double click off in space, and this time I'm gonna go to the top. I don't wanna I think there's a circle in here, or maybe it's in there's one in like the SOP, we don't want that, we just want the top. And we want to find circle, which should be over here somewhere, and drop this down. And if you remember, right, the different operator families, the green ones do not attach to the purple ones directly. Does anybody remember what we have to do to connect them from Thursday? Nobody? Okay. So to connect them, we hit that little star icon on the green note here. So it locks it so we can hover over and get this green value. And then what we want to do on the circle is we have the circle selected and radius is what we want to change. And we don't want to change just one value, although you may want to later. What we want to do is we want to hover over this and we want to, if we click and we want to click drag, right? If I just click, it may just, it leaves that selected, that's great. So we want to click drag and we want to drag this up to the word radius. If I drop it on the word radius and say export chop, then it'll do both axes, right? It'll do the X and Y. And so, this kind of works the way it is for going from circle to square, but it's because, right, it's too big. And so that's what this math operator is going to allow us to do, is to set that end scale. So if I select my math operator here, and I go and make my to range, maybe instead of going from 0, let's go 0.1 is the smallest. And then let's make the biggest 0.3. Right, so now I have something that's a little bit more sane in terms of the scale that it's being applied at. Okay, so that's exciting and all, I guess. One of the things we can do with these circles now is we can also, you can always adjust the center of the circle, and we're going to go ahead and do that with like over time or whatever they would call it, parametrically or something. But yeah, so now we've got this circle that's changing scale based on this. And in our case, with this track in particular, it's not, there's already a lot of fluid motion. If there wasn't, we might want to add a lag, and we could do that as well. So maybe we should, because this also shows us how to do something else. So one of the things that we can do, right, is we can add, so lag just basically slows the signal down some. And the way we can insert an operator is if you hover over the little wire or line between two operators and right click, you can go to insert operator. And then what it'll do is it'll just drop this in line between the two. And so if I go to, what's it called? I just said it like 8 times. And lag, thank you. And then my brain stopped working. If I go to lag and drop this in here, you'll see that, right, it's actually slowed things down a little bit and it's changed the scale. So if I come over here, it's basically just smoothed that pulsing out a little bit. And you'll see that it's got some settings here. It's got this, like, you know, lag value. I could change some things there. And the current lag value is set to 0.2. Again, if I was like, oh, I really actually need to scale that up, I could always use math to scale it more. But it just smooths things out a touch more. Okay, so we've got this circle pulsing. If we wanted to display that large, we can display that large. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for the time being. So let's go ahead and composite this with another video source. There's a couple ways that we can do this. One, we could use the composite object we used before. But in our case, let's go ahead and we're going to do it a slightly different way. So since I know some cameras aren't working for people unless that got resolved, let's go ahead and double click. And we're just going to go ahead and create a top that is we'll just do video, not video device in, we'll do movie file in. And that should give us that banana that is like such a great thing. And we're just going to drag the output from that into the input of the circle. And you'll see that now in the background behind the banana, or behind the circle, we can see that banana. So maybe we should make the circle a little smaller so we can see more of the banana. So I'm just going to go to that math object that we were using for range. And I'm going to set this maybe to 0.05. And set this to 0.2 maybe. There we go. And you can see that I am getting, right, this pulsing circle in front of a banana because that's what we all need to see every day. And now we're making the most amazing music video of all time that's real time. One other thing that we could make an adjustment on is if I click on the trigger, right? I have the threshold set pretty high. If I was to reduce this threshold some, you'll see that it's going to change kind of the rate that this is pulsing, and I'm going to make this display so you can actually see it. But so, right, if I lower this down, it's going to spend, right, you can kind of see it really changes the way that this is triggered. It's still in time with the music, but it's basically reacting to more or less of the waveform. Now, obviously, if I go over 1, it's just never going to trigger because, right, the maximum value I think we get out is 1. So if I go down to, right, somewhere down here, you can see that there's one thing in particular. This seems like a very even beat, which probably means it's the kick. So if I come back over to my audio source so I can actually hear it, right? We've got a beat, and we've got this moving in time with the beat. Okay, so so now that we've done this, we could apply this to all sorts of different parameters just on this one object. So I'm actually going to stop displaying that for a second. So we've got this hub, right, where we're using, where we've got, where we can now, we're going to split out another leg from here to control, let's just say we're going to do the left and right position of our circle. So what we'll need to do is if we hover over this output and right click and go to math. Oh no, hold on a second, don't do that. Hit escape. If you've already set it, just hit undo, which is Control or Command Z. Double click in space and do math. We don't want this to join into the other thing, so we're just going to go ahead now and then click and drag and connect it. And in this case, we're going to use our range right now, right? We're getting some output over here that's, you know, basically it looks like it's from like maybe 0.5 to 1, but we're going to go to our range and we're going to take our output range and let's just make this -1 to 1 and see what that does. It looks like it's barely going below 1. So maybe the 2 range, we know that like that initial one was like maybe at 0.5. So I'm just going to say 0.5 here as the low end. And let's see here. It kind of works a little bit. Let's do something smaller or maybe higher, maybe 0.7. Sure, that'll work. Basically, we just want something where it's going to be moving back and forth. And I think 0.7 will work. You could experiment. We could say maybe this is actually 0.5, but this is supposed to be like 0.7 or something. I don't know. Oh, not 10.7. That would not work out at all. Yeah, I don't know. It's up to you. It doesn't really matter at this point. As long as you've got a little wiggle on either side, we're good to go. Okay, so now I want to, right, there's lots of similarity in the way that we do things here. So we want to also create another null out here. So I can right click and go to null, drop it over here, and then I can click on that little star symbol on this null. So I'm ready to move this data somewhere else. So I'm going to go back to my circle. And we have, right, in this case, I don't want it to go, if I put it on center, on the word, what it's going to do is it's going to be a diagonal motion across the screen. And so I just want to use one of these two. So it doesn't really matter which one. I'm just going to go ahead and grab one and drop it in there and say export chop. And now if I move over here, right, you'll see that this is flickering all over the screen, right? That means that my range is way too big. I'm getting something from like -4 to 4 or something like that. So what I want to do is make a little bit of an adjustment to that because it's really like 0 to 1 across the screen. So, and it might even be centered in the middle. We'll see what happens. So this is too big. So maybe with my math, I can actually say, okay, instead of -1 to 1, let's do let's just say 0 to 0.1 to start with and see what we get. This may make it, there we go. Right, so now it's like that dance move where you like churn the butter. But, right, so now we've got this linear motion happening in addition to our thing. And so those are the values I've got set there. I could make this -0.1 as the low end, and we'll get like a little bit more motion. You can tell that depending on a lot of values, sometimes you just need to make these minor adjustments. And if I set this from range back to the default of 0 to 1, you'll note that it's going to slow that motion down a lot. So I just did 0 to 0.7 and it also reduced it. So it's just a matter of playing and figuring out what makes the most sense. right? And that doesn't do anything, so whatever. Okay. Yeah, and you can see each one of these is going to make a change as we do this. But let's say we're happy with that for the time being. Now, in the past, we used the LFO in the last example we did as a way to like make changes over time. And in this case, I want to show you another way that we can have something cycle over time. And that's using something called noise. And what we're going to do is we're going to use whatever, so this will be vertically, we'll have some noise adjust this vertically. Or do we want to do the banana? Let me see if I can actually set this. No, I'd have to do a transform in another thing. Let's just deal with the circle for now, make our lives easier. So just off in space somewhere, I'm going to double click, and I'm going to use a chop, and I'm going to create noise. And I'm going to drop this down. And what that does is, it's going to create this noise signal. Now, this signal is static currently. And what we need to do is we need to make that not static. And this is something where is it? There it is. Where we're going to use a little bit of code for the first time. And it's something where, the idea is that you could just copy this operator or this little bit of code and use it elsewhere to create this same type of motion. So what we're going to do is we have noise selected. We go to transform in the settings and open up translate by clicking on the plus sign. And for this T X, we're going to create an expression there. I'm just going to paste it in right now and then zoom in so you can see it. And so what you need to type in is ABS time, make sure the capitalization is there, dot, and there's no space there, it's just dot frame, and then star dot 9. And what this does is basically this is time, but as an absolute value. It's the absolute time, and every time I hover over this, it should be different because it's measuring the number of milliseconds since we've been playing this. And then the frame, it just grabs that number, and then we're multiplying that value by some little bit. And what that ends up doing, once I click out of this and zoom out, is it makes this waveform move, which wasn't moving before. And now that it's moving, what we can do is we can basically, that little dot there at the end, we can make our circle move side to side similarly to that value. And so to do that, we want to pull this into a math operator. So I'm going to right click, go to math, drop this out. And then let's see here. I want to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. Yeah, so the math operator, we can just shrink the range some. And what am I taking out there? Okay. And then we pop back to the other one. Okay. So yeah, so we can take our range in the math operator and just reduce it a bit because in my experience, it was just way too big. So I put that down to 0.75, and that just scales it down a touch. If I was to set this to 0.2, it'd be a much tighter motion, but we're going to do 0.75 for now, so it's obvious. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the viewer active. So it's one thing. And something to note, when it's in this mode, you'll see that if I hover over channel 1, it lights up. That's what you want to click on. If I just click over here, it's going to scale things really weird. And when it's in this format, this is unfortunately the way that it works best. So I'm going to actually pull out a little bit and select my circle. And see here. So I have this is the value that I want to drop this into, is the 0 next to the center that we're working with. But again, I have to hover over channel 1, click, drag, and drop it, and say export chop. And so now you can see that, right, I've added a lot of like random motion to that circle. So like if you were trying to, like, I don't know, create like a frog animation with a fly, that could be your fly flying around at this point. Right? And so now we've got something that's got some randomness involved. That's what noise does. And something else to note with noise, if I select that and go to that first tab, there's all sorts of different options. There's sparse, there's Hermite, and they just basically create like a slightly different waveform. You also have these values like amplitude and roughness and period, right? If I increase the period, I'm going to get like a lot more noise, or maybe actually that slows it down. That actually slows it down, sorry. If I decrease the period, it's going to be a lot more, frenetic. If I increase the period, right, those random motions are going to be more slow. And so there's all sorts of different options in here. I don't know what harmonic summation means. They're different algorithms, but we don't care. It's just like what motion looks good. Okay. So we've done this with a circle. However, we could always do this with, right, any other, really any other video object. I don't know if it's square or rectangle. Yeah, so so rectangle is another shape that we can make. I think there's probably polygon as well, or star, or something like that. Where would it be? Oh, just like I thought maybe they had like a star default as well or something, but I don't see it. Sometimes it might be something you'd have to do on your own. Something to note with the circle is that you can set the number of wherever it is. Where is it? Oh, cool. Yeah, so there's this, it took me a while to find it. There's this polygon option, and so if I turn that on, I can just set the number of sides and then slide that up. So if I wanted a different polygonal shape. Softness, if I crank that up, it'll actually make the shape a little bit hazy on the edges. See here, the arc angles I'm not going to worry about, but we can create a border. Right now the border width is 0, but if I increase that and say maybe change my border color to, I don't know, something that we can see, like green. Yeah, I think we can see that on the screen, yeah. Right, so I can add a border. Yeah, there's other things you can do with this type of shape. And the background alpha is set to 0. I don't know. Yeah, we don't need to worry about that. And so, right, so then we could take this thing that this beautiful sketch that we've made, and last time we used, if we went to, if we go to image filters, right, last time we played with, what was it? Like feedback edge. And there's also just feedback in general. If I was to pull this feedback in here and pull this in as the source, you can see that, and then was maybe to make this Oh, for some reason I can't display this one. But you can see with feedback, I'm getting those like, those, I don't know, what do you want to call them? Tracers, motion lines. You know, you can continue to play with different types of effects that exist in here. I'm just throwing things together at this point, just to see what I get. So, right, so, you know, I don't know if that last one was super interesting in this, and it's also impossible to see on the screen there, so maybe we get rid of that. If you ever get to a point where you're like, oh, this is the one, like say, for whatever reason, I really like this convolve thing, and actually maybe I want to throw bloom on there too, why not? But if I, oops, there we go. If I get to somewhere where, oh, that's not going to do anything good for me. Can I automatically put it on top of my source? And no, I cannot. Okay, so we're not going to do that either. But basically, I can come over here, I can right click, and I just need to use the out object. If I do that, then I can hit the display and actually display this. Whereas this other operator over here didn't have the option to display it. So yeah, so I use this. I do feel like this is like maybe one of the more 90s things I've created recently. Those like vibrantly colored edges. It just reminds me of certain design aesthetics from the mid-90s. Okay. So I'm going to stop the tutorial now, and then I can come help, but I wanted to try and get through all of that so I could have one solid recording.